Hello everyone, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about Persona 1. Now I played the PSP version on the company building path. Now you have access to the Snow Queen quest, which was not available in the original localization on the PS1, which is, well, Persona 1 was originally created. Now, if you're in Japan, it's probably a simple case of saying you would probably recommend the PS1 version over the PSP version, but for us English speaking audiences, there's a lot more complications in that kind of recommendation. So, let's get into it. So, Persona 1, if you're coming into Persona 1 from the older games, you're going to have to set down your expectations. This is a lot more of a traditional JRPG. It does still have Persona elements. The characters have personas. Every single character can equip 3 personas at one time and switch between them in combat, giving you a lot more eases. You still have Eagle, who helps you with fusing, but fusing is completely different. Now, if you played Persona 5 and you go into this, you'll have some familiarity, because negotiations are on the table, which they did not exist in 3 and 4. I'm assuming they're in 2, but I haven't played 2 yet at the recording of this. But that's our next Twitch stream, though, so that should be exciting. Fusing in Persona 1, you have to negotiate with your enemies, which has its own complications, as every character has certain commands that interact with certain types of enemies differently, on top of having moon phases that affect their aggressiveness and passiveness to talk or communicate or violently murder you. After acquiring cards, the cards can be fused into personas, and of course you have to be the level of the persona or them being lower than you to fuse them. And being this whole process is a lot more convoluted than the newer entries, it can take some work to get some personas. But luckily there are still some similarities to modern entries. There are still fusion accidents that can cause weird errors, and there is actually a whole secretive persona type, the Full Arcana, which can only be made through accidents, meaning there are rare chances that you can get powerful and rare personas, which is an interesting little RNG, but to be honest, that also creates the issue that most people probably won't ever really get to see them at the same time. Only small select people who got lucky or really put in the time to get to happen. So it can be a little subjective. But you can still create personas, and you bank them with Eagle, so you can keep a certain amount on hand, but you can't fuse personas together. So once a persona no longer is useful to you at all, it'll either rot in the bank or you just delete it and go on your merry way. Now you can also fuse items, which can cause stat increases, different persona types to be created, lots of different effects, so there's a lot more complications instead of the more simplified fuse 2 personas. You get this, and then there's like a rare chance some weird shit can happen. There's a lot more complications to it. Combat is also vastly different. So you have like a grid system on both sides, yours and the enemy's side, and I am not a fan of, like, you basically, if somebody can't reach an enemy with either the melee or any of their persona skills, you have to go in, change where they are and stuff, and it's a boggle, really. It just drags combat down, honestly. And they streamlined the combat more in the PSP version. They updated the UI and stuff and added an auto system, so you can streamline the combative of random encounters and grinding more in the PSP version. But that upgrade does kind of clash with the aesthetic of the art style. See, the whole thing between the PSP and the PS1 version is they were trying to kind of give the pop aesthetic back into Persona 1, which did not have that aesthetic, which Persona 3, 4, and 5 have. So I think the idea was to try and get older fans to feel more normal in the game, I guess. But that had some clashing effects while still using a lot of the old artwork. They also used a few of the old tracks, which were good, but at the same time they added like 2 or 3 new songs to give a little pop into the game, and in doing so, they also got rid of a shit ton. Like, apparently there was like about 40-ish tracks in the original game, and now that's like cut down to 20 for space. And you don't have access to the original form. Like, obviously they updated all the music, even the tracks that are from the original, they've, cleaned them up and maybe spruced them a little bit, so you can't choose, like, between original and remix, and you have, like, half the track list missing, because apparently all the dungeons in the original PS1 version had basically their own music, and now that's not the case. There's a lot of music missing out of the PSP version, and that's why I really say it's really hard to say what version to get for America, because it's a lot more difficult choice versus where Japan could just be like, because you gotta imagine from the Japan's point of view, because their version of Persona 1 on the PS1 wasn't butchered. So for them, it's pretty easy to be like, oh, I can get the PS1 version for the complete original experience, or I can get the PSP version if I want it to be streamlined a little bit more, but, lose out on some of the music and have maybe some questionable design choices with trying to make it a little poppy and UI and that, those are aesthetic changes that would vary from person to person. See, if you're not familiar with the original localization of our game on the PS1, they did the Americanization. It's like, America, and changed several characters, changed the hair color. They made Mark an African American. They literally changed his race and, like, expelled Japanese stuff out of the game and that. And they got a lot of shit for that. And a lot of people point to the original Persona 1 localization being why Atlus changed and went to trying to stick to the original source material versus changing the source material. So you kind of have Persona 1's original localization to thank for that. It was the sacrificial game to help bring about that, but our version still really fucking sucks, because on top of that, you didn't get the Snow Queen quest either. So if you wanted to do everything in the game, the only way to access what little was translated is use cheat codes, and it's a very buggy experience to try and play the Snow Queen quest, because only like a portion of it's translated, and the rest is gobbledygook, and then certain things can trigger the game to freeze. So that's obviously not the best way to play the Snow Queen quest in the American PS1 version. So it's such a shame we don't really have like a pointing definitive edition to point towards for the original experience, because both of ours have flaws in America, the Western localization. So it's really tough to nail down one. And they made the PS1 version vastly easier, which there were difficulty modes in the PSP version, but I played on normal, which is supposed to be the original experience, the original experience, and I found it really easy for the most part. There were like some random encounters that were fucking asinine. Like that, there was this one dungeon where I was running into groups of like 4 or 5 crows that would cast Marin Karen on everyone per turn and confuse everyone to death. It was like nightmare fuel, but overall, like, most bosses weren't difficult. And the strange fact that Karen's SP actually goes up based on moving means you don't really have to hold back too much on your skills. And on top of that, persona skills are also weird, because depending on the persona itself, like, the cost can be subjective. It's really strange. SP costs can be very all over the board, of cheap to expensive. It's very, very bizarre. I feel like there was some, overall, it's hard for me to really compare the game to its time, because I never got to play the original PS1 in the day. So it's kind of hard to really think if it was ahead of its time or if it was like interesting ideas not done well. Because there's not really much I can compare it to in the time frame of the PS1. I would say it was because, I mean, fusing and the moon phase stuff, all things that existed in SMT-esque games prior to Persona Away. And I'm pretty sure the moon phase and so on titles even did even more things than just affect the attitude of the enemies and fusion flaws and things, but it's a tricky call. Honestly, I think most people in the Western hemisphere would probably go with the PSP version, as much as it sucks that there is still some things that were chopped out of it. They restored the localization for the most part, being located in Japan. Changes to characters were voided and everything, though some names were kept to not make it completely alienating to people who played the original version at the same time. So like Mark is still called Mark, and I believe a few other characters kept their names. That didn't seem truly crazy, batshit bizarre, or at least why they were voided certain names of other characters. But honestly, if you can play Japanese, I probably would just recommend the PS1 version, honestly, because having like half the soundtrack just cut out of the game sounds really fucking bizarre to me. And another thing that's really crazy about all this is, okay, so let's first, like I said, I played the PSP version. What would I value it? Like, it's not a super long game. You know, you're looking at between probably 30 hours, 50 hours, depending on if you're wanting to like do everything and how much trouble you have in that. And the Snow Queen quest, to my understanding, is supposed to be harder than the other branch of the path, though it's also simplified with just 4 dungeons, and you basically use the school as your kind of base area. But I would say I would just value it at a pretty normal price of probably just $50 or something. I would say if you're a Persona fan or SMT fan, it's worth going to, but, you know, if you don't really care about completing a whole series or something, the events that happen in the game aren't like the end of the world you need to know or you're not going to understand anything kind of thing. So, I mean, they're all references to the characters even in Persona 5 still, so it's not like they'll completely non-existent after Persona 1, but it's just not necessarily necessary to know everything that happened in Persona 1 either, so it's not like you're missing anything. So I'd say if you're just a hardcore RPG fan, Persona fan, or SMT fan, sure, check out the original Persona. But if you can't really turn back the clock and the gameplay mechanics a bit, maybe it'd be best you skip out. And then, of course, we have the tougher question for the Western audience. How much money are you willing to spend? Because as much as I generously say, I would probably give it a simple $50 as a OG kind of thought of it, trying to be fair to it. But the realistic problem with getting the Western version of either game is they are very expensive. So if you want the PS1 butchered localization, which for some reason is worth hundreds of dollars, between $100 to $300, good luck. I would rather just import the Japanese version and play it in Japanese than buy that. But that's just fucking me. Like, what is the Japanese version even going for, I wonder? Let me look up. I bet it's super cheap. It's, let's see. Low listings here. Let's see. Oh yeah, you can get for there's several copies. There's 3 copies being for sale for 99 cents. Let's see. There's some copies there for $12, $7. Yeah, you can get Persona 1 cheap. It's very cheap for the Japanese font. Nothing way there. I'd rather do that than pay like $200 for the half-assed version we got on the PS1. Now you might be like, okay, so PS1 probably well, because, you know, it was like early Atlas games all pretty well there. What about the PSP version? Well, my friend, you're still in trouble. While you're going to get a better price than the shit version that we got on the PS1, you're still looking at a close to $60 to $100. Like, those sealed copies for $150. There's a few like UMDs that are like $50. Collection edition for $80. Very, still pretty pricey. And like, see, like for the PSP version, because of how it was handled, I would probably give the PSP version more of a $30 price tag over the 50. Like the 50, I would probably say if our version wasn't fucked up, like if it was the Japanese version, I'd give it a 50 if you get what I mean now. But like the PSP version, I'd say is more of a 30 because while it added the Snow Queen back in and stuff and that, but it also took tons of the music, and it's just, it's really a mixed bag on what version you want to get. So I mean, I'd say your choices are get the Japanese PS1 game if you want authenticity and all the content again, including the tracks and stuff. Get the PSP American version if you want it in English and as close as authenticity while sacrificing the music and some of the aesthetic. Because I don't know why you would really want the PS1 Western disc myself. It just, ugh. But it's a mixed bag. But those are my thoughts on the game. So let's go into some of the spoilers. Spoilers. So, depending on the paths you go, the Snow Queen path, you get stuck in the school and this mask is possessing people. You go through some dungeons to destroy it. And then, depending on how you believe the storyline goes and the canonicity of the series, some people believe the Snow Queen quest takes place before the company building thing. Some people don't think it's even part of the main storyline. There's no real 100% confirmation of whether both stories are canon or not. But the second storyline has to be canon for sure, because it has to do with a lot of events that would go on forward. But the second path, the company path, it's more of a traditional JRPG. You're going to go through the city, towns. You're going to go to an alternate timeline place that's created by one of your friends' imagination, which is this quote-unquote ideal world that gets abused by this guy who runs his own company. He's trying to use it to essentially become a god and rule over the real world and shit. So you bounce from the real world to this quote-unquote ideal world and then back into the real world to finish up that path. It's pretty cut and dry, really. It's just a bunch of teenagers taking on a corrupt guy who got access to godlike powers and shit. It's a pretty bizarre story, but it's also not exactly incredibly complex. But they take him down, they get things restored, and people just seem to slowly forget about the incident, which is kind of hard to believe considering like there was like a whole building that got chopped in fucking half. So it's kind of hard to think. And it kind of leaves like a weird ominous vagueness about the main character, like he just kind of wandered off or something. Kind of weird that. But yeah, I'd say it's pretty weird going from Persona 5 to Persona 1 for sure. It definitely was interesting seeing a lot of the roots because you have access to guns. All the characters use different types of guns. Nuclear is an element in the original Persona, which to me, when in Persona 5, it felt like it was new because it didn't exist in 3 and 4. So it was pretty interesting seeing the roots of the series. But like I said, there's a lot of conflicting choices to be made on what version of the original Persona game you want to play. I mean, some people might actually want to play the Persona. Sorry, I keep accidentally hitting the little drawer thing on my desk. That's what that squeaky sound is. But there is one other choice that I forgot to mention, actually, that I think about. But sadly, that choice gives you the original localization on the PS1. But if there are still PlayStation 1 classics floating around cheaply, you could do, like, I got mine for like $20 on one of the random sales. But the original localized Persona 1 is on the PlayStation Classic, and, well, you know, $20 with some other games could justify the missing content of the Snow Queen quest and the butchering of the localization, but that's more of a subjective choice you would have to make on your own. But those are my thoughts on the original Persona on the PSP, at least, and the things I know about the PS1 release. It's not like the worst thing in the universe by any means, but it is definitely different going back to it from the newer entries. But like I said, it's interesting to see the Persona roots. The roots of the Persona franchise. So I'm definitely very interested to see what Persona 2 Innocent Sin does. And what things they took criticizing. Because personally, when we're just strictly talking about the gameplay and not going into the localization issues that Atlas did with the original release and that, combat was just kind of clunky with the formation that. So I kind of hope they do away with that and polish up on elements that would slowly form into the Persona franchise, hopefully. So I'm definitely looking forward to streaming Persona 2 and seeing what things they looked into improving over the original release. But good luck buying it for a reasonable price. Maybe if you're lucky, you can find it on the wild cheaper. But I got to say, looking at eBay, I'm pretty glad I picked them up back in the heyday. Because, wow, even the Persona 2 one's pretty fucking pricey. So, yeah. Anywho, if you have any questions or anything about Persona 1, please feel free to leave a comment down below. If you feel like you learned anything interesting, feel free to leave a like. If you feel like you learned nothing of interest at all, feel free to leave a dislike. You're free. And until next time, thank you for joining me here at the Proving Grounds. And don't forget your Persona!
どうだった？私の作った